That night, the bitter scent of crushed leaves filled the kitchen. "Grace, what did you put in this soup?" Daniel's voice trembled, though he tried to hide it behind authority. Grace did not turn from the pot. She kept stirring slowly, deliberately. "It's bitter leaf soup, Daniel. Your favorite." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Don't play games with me." She finally faced him. Her eyes were calm, too calm. "I learned from you." The silence between them felt heavier than the humid Lagos air pressing against the windows. "I asked you a question," Daniel snapped, stepping closer. "What did you add?" Grace wiped her hands on a white towel, folding it neatly. Patience, pain, and memory. Set back a watch this wonderful story, share, comment, like. And if you haven't subscribed, please do. Now let's being the night the truth spilled. The dining table was set perfectly. White plates, polished cutlery, chilled wine. To anyone looking from the outside, they were the perfect Lecky couple. Successful businessman, devoted wife. But perfection is often a well-decorated lie. Daniel pulled out his chair slowly. "You've been acting strange for weeks." Grace sat opposite him, her back straight. "Have I?" "Yes. Quiet, observing, like you're planning something." She gave a faint smile. "Maybe I just got tired of talking." He scoffed. "Grace, if this is about the transfer." She cut him off sharply. "The 50 million naira?" The air shifted. Daniel leaned back. "I told you it was an investment." "Into whose account?" she asked softly. He didn't answer immediately. "That girl," Grace continued, her voice steady but her fingers tightening under the table, "the one you call your assistant." Daniel exhaled. "You're overreacting." Grace laughed, a sound without joy. "Overreacting? You moved our savings, the money I inherited from my father, the money that built your company." "Our company," Daniel corrected. "No," she said firmly, "mine." Daniel's eyes darkened. "Be careful." "Or what?" she challenged. For 5 years, Grace had stood beside Daniel. She had believed in him when he was nothing but ambition and borrowed suits. She funded his startup. She connected him with clients. She even signed documents in his favor because she trusted him. Trust, the sweetest fruit that rots the fastest. "You went through my phone," Daniel accused. Grace held his gaze. "I did. And I saw the pictures, the hotel bookings, the messages." Daniel's expression shifted from anger to something colder. "Calculation. You were never meant to see that." The words cut deeper than any slap. Grace blinked slowly. "Never meant to?" "It wasn't serious." "You told her you were filing for divorce." Daniel stood abruptly. "Enough." Grace did not flinch. "You told her the house would be hers." "That's business talk." She shook her head. "No, that's betrayal." Outside, thunder cracked across the sky. Inside, something broke. Daniel grabbed his glass of wine, gulping it down. "You think you're innocent? You think you're perfect?" Grace's brows furrowed. "What does that mean?" "You've always acted superior, because you had money, because your father left you properties." Her breath caught. "So this was about pride?" she whispered. "It was about respect," Daniel shouted. "Respect?" she repeated. "You brought another woman into our marriage." He slammed his fist on the table. The plates rattled. "I built myself." "With my money," Grace said quietly. The truth hung heavy. Daniel looked at the soup bowl in front of him. "Why is it so bitter?" Grace's lips curved slightly, because bitter leaf must be washed carefully. If you rush the process, the bitterness remains. He stared at her. "And some bitterness," she added, "never washes away." 3 months earlier. Grace first suspected something the day Daniel stopped complaining. It sounds strange, but Daniel was a man who complained about everything. Traffic, fuel prices, staff incompetence. Then suddenly he became peaceful, too peaceful. He started smiling at his phone, taking late-night calls outside, changing passwords. One evening, Grace followed him. She wasn't proud of it. Daniel's car pulled into a boutique hotel in Victoria Island. Grace parked across the street, her hands trembling on the steering wheel. When she saw them, Daniel and the woman in a red dress, laughing intimately as they walked inside, something inside Grace died. She did not scream, she did not cry, she simply watched. The woman was young, confident. Her hand rested comfortably on Daniel's chest as if it belonged there. Grace drove home slowly that night, and she began to plan. Grace Onyema was not a weak woman. She was her father's daughter, Chief Patrick Onyema, a businessman who taught her one lesson repeatedly: never build a house on land that is not yours. Daniel had forgotten that. What Daniel did not know was that every property they lived in, every car he drove, every major share in his company was legally under Grace's name. She had trusted him, yes, but she had never been foolish. The company registration papers, her name. The land documents, her signature. The majority shareholder, Grace Onyema. Daniel believed he was king, but he was sitting on a throne that could disappear overnight. Daniel, when will she leave? The woman in red, Vanessa, traced her fingers along Daniel's chest inside his office. Soon, Daniel assured her. I'm preparing the papers. You promised me that house. It will be yours. Vanessa smiled. I don't share. Daniel kissed her. You won't have to. What he didn't know was that Grace was sitting in her car outside, watching them through the glass wall. She didn't cry this time. She recorded every touch, every promise, evidence. Because revenge, like bitter leaf, must be prepared carefully. Back at the dining table, Daniel pushed the soup away. I'm not hungry. Grace nodded. That's fine. I'll stay at the office tonight. Of course you will. He paused. What does that mean? Nothing. Daniel grabbed his keys and stormed out. The moment the door shut, Grace's composure cracked. Tears slid silently down her face. 5 years of loyalty, 5 years of sacrifice, 5 years of love, replaced by a girl in a red dress. Grace walked to her study and opened her laptop. She made one call. Barrister Aide. Yes, madam. It's time. The bank manager's voice was polite but firm. I'm sorry, Mr. Daniel Okafor. Your account has been temporarily restricted. Daniel blinked. Restricted? That's impossible. I have meetings in 30 minutes. Yes, sir. We received a directive from the majority account holder. Majority holder? His fingers tightened around the phone. I am the majority holder. There was a pause on the line. No, sir. The majority shareholder and principal signatory is Mrs. Grace Onyema Okafor. The words struck like thunder. Daniel's face drained of color. There must be a mistake. There is no mistake, sir. The call ended. For the first time in years, Daniel felt something unfamiliar. Fear. Across town, Grace sat calmly in Barrister Aide's office. Are you certain? The lawyer asked gently. Grace's eyes were steady. He moved our savings to fund his mistress. He promised her my house. Barrister Aide nodded slowly. Then we proceed legally. I don't want drama, Grace said quietly. I want precision. Then precision is what he will get. Documents were signed. Calls were made. Shares were transferred back solely into Grace's name. Access was revoked. And just like that, the empire Daniel thought he owned began to slip through his fingers. Vanessa stood in the luxury living room Daniel had shown her many times. When will I move in officially? She asked, twirling happily. Daniel paced like a trapped animal. There's a small delay. She frowned. Delay? You said your wife was powerless. Daniel didn't answer. Daniel? Her voice sharpened. He stopped pacing. The accounts are frozen. Silence. What do you mean frozen? She has controlling shares. Vanessa laughed nervously. You're joking? I'm not. Her expression changed, admiration turning into calculation. So the company, legally hers. The house? Hers. The cars? Hers. Vanessa stepped back slowly. So what exactly is yours, Daniel? He didn't respond. Because he suddenly realized very little. Grace did not believe in shouting. She believed in timing. At the company's annual investors' dinner, an event Daniel loved because it fed his ego, Grace arrived unannounced. The hall went silent when she stepped in. Elegant, composed, powerful. Daniel froze mid-speech. Grace, he muttered. She smiled politely. Continue. He swallowed. Ladies and gentlemen, as I was saying, Grace walked to the stage. Actually, she interrupted gently, that I think it's time we clarified something. Murmurs filled the room. She took the microphone. As majority shareholder of Okafor Holdings, I want to reassure our investors that recent irregular financial movements have been corrected. Daniel's chest tightened. Certain funds, she continued calmly, were redirected without board approval. That will not happen again. Every investor turned toward Daniel. Vanessa, seated near the back in a red dress, felt heat rise to her face. Grace's eyes found her. And to anyone who believes promises whispered in private rooms, Grace added softly, always confirm who truly owns the building before claiming a room inside it. The humiliation was complete. Daniel had never looked smaller. That night, Vanessa confronted him. You lied to me. I didn't lie, Daniel argued. You made yourself look like a king when you were a tenant. Daniel's temper flared. Watch your tone. Or what? You'll freeze my account too? She snapped. He grabbed her wrist. She pulled away sharply. Don't touch me. For the first time, Vanessa saw him clearly. Not powerful, not confident, desperate. I don't date broke men, she said coldly, and she walked away. The doorbell rang at 8 a.m. Daniel opened it to find a courier holding a thick envelope. He didn't need to open it to know, but he did. Divorce petition. Grounds, adultery, financial misconduct, breach of marital trust. He stormed into the house. Grace! She was in the garden, watering her plants peacefully. You think you can destroy me? He shouted. She turned slowly. You destroyed yourself. You'll regret this. She studied him carefully. Daniel, when you chose her, you thought I would beg. His silence confirmed it, but I am not the woman who begs. Her voice did not shake. I am the woman who leaves. Within weeks, the news spread quietly through Lagos business circles. Daniel was removed as CEO. Grace appointed an interim board. His access cards stopped working. Former friends stopped answering calls. The same men who toasted him at parties now avoided eye contact. Power is loud when you have it. Silence is louder when you look. Months later, Grace sat alone at a restaurant overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. Peaceful. Stronger. Not because she won, but because she survived. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. Grace. Daniel's voice was weaker now. Yes? I made mistakes. She said nothing. I lost everything. She looked out at the waves crashing against the shore. No, she corrected softly. You lost what was never yours. He exhaled shakily. Is there any chance? No. The word was gentle, but final. Grace ended the call. The bitterness in her heart had not vanished, but it no longer controlled her. Like bitter leaf, she had washed it carefully. And what remained was strength. The rain poured heavily over Lagos Island, matching the storm inside Daniel. He sat alone in a small rented apartment, far from the Lekki mansion he once called home. His phone buzzed again. Another creditor, another ignored call. Daniel stared at his reflection in the dark window. They think I'm finished, he muttered. His jaw tightened. I am not finished. 3 days later, Daniel stood outside an old building in Surulere. Not glamorous, not impressive, but inside that building was someone who hated Grace almost as much as he now did. Chief Balogun, a rival investor Grace had quietly pushed out of a land deal 2 years earlier. The secretary eyed Daniel skeptically. Do you have an appointment? Tell him Daniel Okafor is here. He'll want to see me. Minutes later, Daniel sat across from the older man. Chief Balogun leaned back slowly. I heard you fell. Daniel forced a smile. Temporary setback. The chief chuckled. Your wife is sharp. Very sharp. Daniel's eyes darkened. I underestimated her. And now I want my company back. Chief Balogun studied him. And what can you possibly offer me? Daniel leaned forward. Information. Daniel knew the company inside out. He knew suppliers who were loyal to him personally. He knew weaknesses in contracts Grace hadn't yet discovered, and he knew one dangerous truth. Grace trusted too easily when it came to people who seemed harmless. Chief Balogun tapped his desk slowly. You want to sabotage her? Daniel did not hesitate. Yes. The chief smiled slowly. Then let us begin. At first, it was subtle. A shipment delayed, a supplier withdrawing unexpectedly, a key client canceling a contract at the last minute. Grace sat in the boardroom, listening calmly as reports came in. This doesn't feel random, she said quietly. Barrister Ade frowned. You suspect Daniel? Grace did not answer immediately, but her silence said everything. Daniel met secretly with 2 former employees. She ruined my reputation, he told them bitterly. She removed me like I was nothing. One of the men hesitated. But sir, legally the company is hers. Daniel's tone hardened. Reputation is not built by documents. It's built by perception. He slid envelopes across the table. Inside, money. Spread the word that the company is unstable. And if we refuse, one asked nervously. Daniel leaned back. Then remember who hired you in the first place. Fear did the rest. Within weeks, whispers filled Lagos business circles. Grace is inexperienced. She can't manage without Daniel. The company may collapse. Investors grew nervous. Stock values trembled. Grace stood in her office overlooking the city. She could feel it now. Daniel was not done. She didn't call him. She went to him. Daniel opened his apartment door, surprised to see her standing there. Elegant as ever. You're bold, he said coldly. You're predictable, she replied. He stepped aside reluctantly. The apartment was modest, bare, a painful contrast to the luxury he once enjoyed. You're sabotaging the company, Grace said calmly. Prove it. She stepped closer. You're angry. I understand that, but if the company falls, you fall with it. He laughed bitterly. I've already fallen. No, she corrected softly. You're choosing to sink. His eyes flashed. You humiliated me. You humiliated yourself. Silence thickened between them. You could have forgiven me, he said quietly. Grace looked at him as if seeing him for the first time. You betrayed me financially, emotionally, publicly. Her voice did not rise. And now you want to destroy what I built because your ego is bleeding? His breathing grew heavy. You were nothing without me, he shouted. She held his gaze. And you were everything because of me. The truth hit harder than anger. After she left, Daniel's desperation deepened. Chief Balogun called him that night. The rumors are spreading, the chief said smoothly, but we need something stronger. What do you mean? A scandal. Daniel hesitated. What kind of scandal? Chief Balogun's voice lowered. Financial fraud, regulatory investigation, something that forces her out. Daniel's heart pounded. That could destroy the company permanently. The chief's tone turned cold. I thought you wanted revenge. Daniel stared at the city lights through his cracked window. Revenge. The word tasted bitter, but so did humiliation, and bitterness, once planted, grows wild. Daniel couldn't sleep. Memories haunted him. Grace supporting him when no one believed in his ideas, Grace staying up late reviewing contracts, Grace defending him when investors doubted him. He clenched his fists. She made me feel small, he whispered to himself. But another voice inside him asked quietly, or did you make yourself small? His phone buzzed. A message from Chief Balogun. The documents are ready. Just sign. Daniel stared at the screen. One signature, and Grace's world could burn, but so would any chance of redemption. His hands trembled. For the first time since their war began, Daniel hesitated. Daniel stared at the document for a long time. Chief Balogun's voice echoed in his head, just sign, fraud allegations, anonymous petitions, fabricated regulatory complaints. One signature would trigger investigations that could freeze the company's operations for months. Daniel's hand trembled, then hardened. If she wants war, he muttered, I'll give her war. He signed. The pen scratched across the paper like a blade across skin. There was no turning back. 2 weeks later, officials arrived at Grace's headquarters unannounced. Regulatory compliance officers, tax authorities, financial crime investigators. Employees watched in shock as files were requested, systems audited, accounts scrutinized. Grace remained calm. Cooperate fully, she instructed the board. We have nothing to hide. But even false smoke can cause real panic. Investors began withdrawing. Partners paused contracts. The media picked up whispers. Okafor Holdings under investigation. Daniel watched the news from his apartment. For the first time since his fall, he smiled, sabotage is never clean. Hundreds of employees began to worry about salaries. Junior staff cried in hallways. One manager resigned out of fear. Grace walked through the office floor one afternoon, feeling the tension in the air. A young accountant stopped her. Are we going to lose our jobs? The question pierced deeper than any accusation. Grace forced a reassuring smile. No, this company was built on truth. We will survive this. But when she returned to her office, she closed the door and leaned against it. Daniel hadn't just attacked her. He had attacked livelihoods, families, dreams. Her jaw tightened. Now she understood. This was no longer about pride. This was destruction. Chief Balogun invited Daniel to celebrate. You see, the older man said smoothly, she's drowning. Daniel nodded, though something inside him felt unsettled. And when she's removed, the chief continued, the board will panic. I'll step in with emergency capital. Control will shift. Daniel frowned. Control? The chief smiled thinly. Of course, you didn't think I was helping you out of kindness? Daniel's stomach tightened. You said I'd get my position back. I said we would weaken her, the chief corrected. Don't confuse revenge with ownership. Daniel felt the ground shift beneath him. You're using me. The chief leaned forward, and you used your wife. Silence. Don't pretend you're a victim now. For the first time, Daniel realized he wasn't the mastermind. He was the weapon. The investigation intensified. Though Grace's records were clean, bureaucracy moved slowly. Headlines grew louder. Daniel walked past a newspaper stand and saw her face on the cover, not as a villain, but as a controversial businesswoman under scrutiny. He expected satisfaction. Instead, he felt something heavier. Guilt. But it was too late. Chief Balogun had already invested heavily in the chaos, and powerful men do not like losing in Vestporn. Grace sat across from Barrister Ade late one evening. "This wasn't random," she said firmly. "No," he agreed. "It was coordinated." She slid a folder across the table. Inside were call logs, bank transfers, connections. Daniel's name appeared repeatedly. Barrister Ade looked up slowly. "Are you certain you want to go this far?" Grace's eyes were no longer soft. He crossed the line. "What are you planning?" She spoke calmly. "A forensic audit. And when the truth comes out, I won't just clear my name." She paused. "I will expose his." Grace did something unexpected. She announced a temporary voluntary internal review, projecting transparency and strength. Investors were surprised by her boldness. Media tone shifted slightly. Behind the scenes, she worked with digital analysts to trace the origin of the anonymous complaints. Encrypted emails, shell accounts, hidden transactions. Every trail slowly led back to Daniel and beyond him, to Chief Balogun. Grace's lips curved faintly. "You wanted war," she whispered. "Now you have it." Daniel tried calling Chief Balogun. No answer. He went to the office. The secretary refused him entry. "You don't have an appointment." He pounded the desk. "Tell him it's urgent." The chief finally emerged, irritated. "You're drawing attention," he said sharply. "They're tracing the complaints. And," the chief replied coolly, "nothing leads directly to me." Daniel's chest tightened. "What about me?" The chief looked at him coldly. "You signed." The words echoed like a prison door slamming shut. 2 nights later, Daniel's doorbell rang. He opened it to find 2 officials standing outside. "Mr. Daniel Okafor?" "Yes." "You are required to answer questions regarding fraudulent regulatory filings." His heart dropped. Behind them, neighbors peeked through curtains. Humiliation returned. But this time, there was no Grace to fight, no empire to hide behind, just consequences. Grace stood before her board days later. "The investigations have revealed deliberate sabotage," she announced firmly. "Evidence points to coordinated false reporting." Gasps filled the room. "We will pursue legal action against all responsible parties." Her voice did not tremble, not with anger, not with pain, but with power reclaimed. Daniel sat alone in an interrogation room, fluorescent lights humming overhead, sweat forming at his temples. One question echoed repeatedly. "Why did you file false allegations against your wife's company?" He closed his eyes. Revenge had felt powerful, but power borrowed from bitterness always demands repayment, and the debt had arrived. "Mr. Daniel Okafor, you are being placed under arrest for conspiracy, fraudulent reporting, and attempted corporate sabotage." The words rang out sharply in the narrow corridor of his apartment building, bouncing off the cream-colored walls and polished railings, echoing from one floor to the next, as though the building itself wanted to be certain everyone heard. Doors along the hallway creaked open inch by cautious inch. Curtains shifted. Eyes appeared in thin slivers between hinges and frames. Whispers floated into the air like thin trails of smoke, curling and spreading from neighbor to neighbor. Daniel's chest tightened painfully, as if an invisible fist had closed around his lungs. The cold metal cuffs snapped around his wrists with a final, unforgiving click that seemed louder than the officer's voice. "This is a misunderstanding," he muttered weakly, his voice lacking its former authority. But even as the words left his mouth, they sounded hollow. Even he did not believe them. As officers guided him toward the staircase, their hands firm at his elbows, the weight of every footstep pressed against his pride, the descent felt longer than it had ever been before. Then suddenly, camera flashes exploded in his face. White bursts of light blinded him. Reporters surged forward. Microphones stretched toward him like spears. "Mr. Okafor, did you attempt to destroy your wife's company? Was this revenge? Are you working with Chief Balogun?" The irony cut deeper than the handcuffs. He once enjoyed the spotlight. He once commanded headlines. He once stood tall before cameras, smiling confidently. Now the spotlight burned. By morning, Lagos was buzzing. News alerts chimed across phones. Screens lit up in offices and homes. Former CEO arrested in corporate sabotage scandal. His face filled blogs and business news platforms. Images of him in cuffs circulated rapidly. Comment sections were merciless. He tried to destroy the woman who built him. Pride before downfall. This is why you don't bite the hand that feeds you. Daniel sat in a holding cell, staring blankly at the pale concrete wall. The same city that once praised him now mocked him openly. He had thought humiliation was standing on a stage while Grace exposed him. He had believed that moment was the lowest point. He was wrong. This was humiliation. Grace did not celebrate. There was no champagne, no triumphant phone calls. She sat quietly in her living room, the television muted, watching footage replay over and over again. Daniel being escorted in handcuffs, reporters shouting questions. His head lowered. Barrister Ade stood nearby, composed and observant. "The evidence is strong," he said carefully. "He may face serious charges." Grace exhaled slowly, the breath heavy with exhaustion. "I never wanted this." "You wanted justice." She kept her eyes on the screen, studying Daniel's image as if searching for something that was no longer there. He chose destruction. Her voice carried no joy, no triumph, only fatigue. Meanwhile, Chief Balogan had already begun distancing himself. Phone numbers that once connected instantly were now unreachable. Offices were temporarily closed for renovation. Assistants claimed ignorance. When investigators attempted direct contact, his lawyers responded instead. Formal, controlled, strategic. Daniel realized too late, the powerful rarely fall alone. They push someone else first, and he had walked willingly. Inside a cold interview room lit by harsh fluorescent lights, an investigator slid a stack of documents across the metal table. These emails were traced back to a device registered under your name. Daniel's eyes moved over the pages, but he said nothing. These payments were authorized from an account linked to you. Silence again. The air felt heavy. Why? The single word lingered between them. Daniel swallowed hard. She humiliated me. The investigator's expression did not change. So you tried to ruin hundreds of employees? Daniel's lips parted, then closed. He had no answer, because revenge had felt personal, intimate, private. But its consequences were public, wide-reaching, unforgiving. Grace attended a shareholder meeting days later. This time, there were no whispers about instability, no doubts about leadership, only respect, measured nods, steady applause. One investor stood and cleared his throat. "Mrs. Onyema, your handling of this crisis was exceptional." She nodded politely, maintaining composure. Professional. Calm. But later, alone in her office, when the doors were closed and the silence settled in, she allowed herself to feel the weight she had been carrying. The betrayal, the legal battles, the emotional scars that could not be documented in reports. Winning did not erase pain. It did not undo sleepless nights. It did not restore trust. It simply proved she survived it. Daniel entered the courtroom under heavy media presence. Cameras were not allowed inside, but artists waited with sketch pads ready. Reporters lined the exterior steps. The air was thick with anticipation. Inside, sketches would later capture the image clearly. A once confident businessman sitting stiffly behind his lawyer, shoulders tense, jaw tight. Grace sat across the aisle, composed, unshaken, controlled. For a brief second, their eyes met across the courtroom. Daniel expected anger, expected resentment, expected fire. Instead, he saw something colder. Detachment. He was no longer her partner, no longer her rival, no longer her enemy. Just a consequence. Evidence was presented methodically, carefully. Digital trails mapped across screens, financial records traced movement of funds, recorded conversations replayed for the court. A witness statement linked Chief Balogan's private meetings directly to Daniel's actions. Daniel's lawyer argued emotional distress, impulsiveness, poor judgment born of wounded pride. But the prosecution emphasized intention, calculated moves, signed documents, premeditation. The courtroom listened and judged. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered once more, eager and relentless. "Mrs. Onyema, do you have any statement?" Grace paused briefly. The cameras leaned closer. Microphones edged forward. Yes. Silence fell around her. Revenge destroys the one who carries it. She did not say Daniel's name. She did not have to. Alone back in his holding cell, awaiting the judge's decision, Daniel finally stopped pretending. The noise was gone. The cameras were gone. The reporters were gone. Only the quiet remained, and the truth. He had not just lost a company. He had lost respect. He had lost love. He had lost integrity. And perhaps soon he would lose his freedom. He rested his head in his hands, the bitterness he once nurtured, the anger he once justified, the pride he once protected. It had grown steadily inside him, feeding, expanding, darkening. It had grown into a storm, and now it had swallowed him whole. The courtroom was suffocatingly quiet. Even the air felt heavy. Daniel stood as the judge adjusted his glasses and began to speak. This court has carefully reviewed the evidence presented. digital records, financial transfers, witness testimonies, and signed documents. Every word felt like a hammer against Daniel's chest. Grace sat still across the room, her fingers lightly clasped in her lap. The accused, Mr. Daniel Okafor, knowingly participated in filing fraudulent regulatory complaints with the intention of destabilizing Okafor Holdings. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Daniel's lawyer shifted uncomfortably. The judge continued. This was not an act of emotional impulse alone. It was calculated, coordinated, and damaging, not only to the company, but to innocent employees and investors. Daniel swallowed hard. His eyes briefly searched for Grace's. She did not look away. The court finds the defendant guilty of conspiracy and fraudulent reporting. The word guilty echoed like a final drumbeat. Daniel's knees nearly gave way. The judge paused before delivering the sentence. However, he added, the court recognizes that this case involves first-time criminal conduct and that the financial damage was mitigated before permanent collapse occurred. Daniel's lawyer exhaled quietly. Therefore, this court sentences Mr. Daniel Okafor to 3 years imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 18 months for good behavior. Gasps filled the courtroom. Daniel's breath caught. 3 years. 3 years behind bars. In addition, the judge continued, the defendant is ordered to pay financial restitution for investigative costs and damages incurred. The gavel struck. This court is adjourned. Reporters rushed outside. Headlines exploded within minutes. Former CEO sentenced in sabotage case. Grace exited the courthouse calmly. Microphones were thrust toward her again. Mrs. Onyema, do you feel justice has been served? She paused. Justice. Was this justice? My goal was never imprisonment, she said softly. My goal was accountability. Do you hate him? Grace's expression remained unreadable. No. And for the first time, that answer was trying prison. In a quiet holding room, Daniel was granted one final meeting before being transferred. Grace stepped inside. The silence between them was no longer sharp. It was tired. Daniel spoke first. You won. She shook her head slightly. This was never a competition. He gave a hollow laugh. It feels like one. Grace studied him. You had everything, she said quietly. Love, partnership, opportunity. I felt small beside you, he admitted. Her brows softened slightly. I never wanted you to feel small. But I did, he whispered, and instead of building myself, I tried to break you. The honesty hurt more than the betrayal. Grace exhaled. I don't hate you, Daniel, but I cannot carry your consequences. He nodded slowly. I know. For a brief moment, the years they once shared flickered between them. Then the guard stepped in. Time. Daniel stood. As he walked away, he did not look at Primero. That night, Grace stood alone on her balcony overlooking Lagos. The city lights shimmered like distant stars. She should have felt triumphant. Instead, she felt reflective. Revenge had not given her peace. Strength had, truth had, resilience had. The bitter leaf of revenge had been crushed, boiled, and served. But she had chosen not to consume it. She had chosen to survive it. Months passed, the company stabilized, investors returned, employees regained confidence. Grace launched a foundation supporting women in business, particularly those financially manipulated by partners. At the launch event, she stood before an audience and said, "Power is not proven by destroying someone who hurt you. It is proven by rebuilding what they tried to break." Applause filled the hall. This time it was not for drama. It was for growth. Daniel adjusted slowly to prison life, the noise, the routine, the loss of identity. He was no longer CEO, no longer husband, just inmate. At night, he often replayed the moment he signed those documents. One decision, one signature, and everything changed. For the first time in his life, he began to understand something simple. Bitterness is easy. Accountability is hard. One evening, Grace prepared bitter leaf soup again. Not for revenge, not for symbolism, but because it reminded her of home, of resilience, of tradition. She tasted it carefully, balanced, no longer overwhelmingly bitter. She smiled faintly. Some bitterness, when washed properly, becomes nourishment, and some pain, when faced bravely, becomes power. Grace and Daniel's story is not just about marriage. It is not just about betrayal. It is not even just about revenge. It is about choices. Daniel allowed insecurity to grow where gratitude should have lived. Instead of building himself up, he tried to tear someone else down. Instead of communicating his pain, he fed his pride. And when pride and bitterness joined hands, destruction followed. Grace, on the other hand, was betrayed deeply, emotionally and financially. She had every reason to respond with rage. She had every reason to destroy him completely. But here's the difference. Grace chose strength over noise. She chose strategy over chaos. She chose accountability over blind revenge. Yes, Daniel went to prison. Yes, he faced public disgrace. But the greatest punishment he faced was realizing he destroyed his own life with his own hands. And the greatest victory Grace achieved was not sending him to jail. It was refusing to let bitterness turn her into him. What did we learn? Never let insecurity control your decisions. Feeling small is not a crime. Destroying others because of it is. Revenge may feel powerful in the moment, but consequences are stronger. Protect yourself legally and financially. Love does not cancel wisdom. Silence and strategy are more powerful than shouting. When someone betrays you, you have two choices: become bitter or become better. Grace chose to become better. Daniel chose bitterness, and life responded accordingly. The bitter leaf can either poison you or strengthen you. The choice is yours. To everyone reading this story, if you have ever been betrayed, if you have ever been underestimated, if you have ever felt small beside someone you loved, remember this: your response will define your future more than their betrayal. The bitter leaf can either poison you or strengthen you. The choice is yours. If this story moved you, if it taught you something, if you felt the emotions, the tension, the lessons, like this story, comment your biggest lesson below. Share it with someone who needs to hear this, and subscribe for more powerful stories full of emotion, betrayal, strength, and redemption. This is not just storytelling. This is life. Until the next story.